On the distant world of Zyre, where towering crystal spires pierced the sky and the air hummed with the power of ancient technology, Princess Kalara stood tall. She wasn't just any royal. She was the crown princess, the future ruler of an empire that spanned across many star systems. Her beauty, grace, and intellect were unparalleled. However, it was her strength of will that set her apart. Princess Kalara had no time for weakness, and her standards for those who sought her attention were impossibly high. No one, male or female, had ever caught her eye. The Zyrian Empire was a powerful force in the galaxy, and the princess's refusal to choose a partner had become a topic of great discussion across the stars. The most respected warriors, diplomats, and thinkers from distant civilizations had come to offer their admiration, hoping to win her favor. But one by one, they were turned away. Some had tried to flatter her with gifts, others with impressive feats, but all of them had failed. She saw through their pretenses and could sense their true intentions. None of them respected her as a person, only as the key to securing political power. For years, Kalara had rejected every suitor, causing whispers to spread through the halls of her palace. Some said she was too proud, while others claimed she was too cold and distant. But Kalara simply didn't care. She wanted more than just an alliance. She wanted someone who could challenge her intellectually, someone who didn't just admire her crown but respected her as an individual. She longed for someone who could see beyond her royal title. Each evening, as the sun set behind the great spires, she would stand alone on the balcony, gazing at the stars. These were the very stars that her ancestors had once conquered. And now, as the future ruler, it was her destiny to command them as well. But the thought of ruling alone left her with a gnawing emptiness. She had no true companion, no one to share her burdens with. Still, she refused to settle. Meanwhile, far from Zyre, on a much smaller planet known as Earth, Lieutenant Marcus Hale prepared for a mission that would change the course of his life. He wasn't a royal or a diplomat. He was simply a human, a representative of Earth who had been chosen to join the Galactic Concord as part of an intergalactic peacekeeping force. Earth had only recently joined the galactic community, and Marcus was one of the first humans to be sent on such an important assignment. When Marcus received his orders, he thought little of the politics involved. He had always been a practical man, focused on the task at hand. The human delegation was to attend a summit on the neutral moon of Arthea, where representatives from across the galaxy would meet to discuss the future of the Galactic Concord. Among the many topics to be discussed was the issue of potential marriages between influential families to strengthen political ties. It was at this summit where Marcus would meet Princess Kalara for the first time. He had heard of her, who hadn't? She was the subject of every major report in the galaxy. Yet Marcus had no interest in her royal title or her beauty. He had never been impressed by power or status. His mission was clear: represent Earth with integrity and focus on building peaceful alliances. Little did he know, the princess's rejection of suitors was about to come to a head. The summit began with a grand display of lights and sounds, each species showcasing their cultures with pride. Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, observing the various alien dignitaries as they mingled. He was just one human among many, but there was something different in the air. The galaxy's most powerful leaders had gathered, and the stakes were higher than ever before. As the event continued, Princess Kalara entered the main hall. Her presence was immediate and overwhelming. The whispers that followed her were filled with awe and admiration, but also curiosity. Would she finally choose a suitor this time? Would she bend to the pressure? Kalara glanced around the room with an air of quiet authority, her eyes scanning the faces of those gathered. And for the briefest of moments, her gaze locked onto Marcus. She had seen many faces before, but something about this human intrigued her. He wasn't fawning over her like the others. He wasn't trying to impress her with grand gestures or false compliments. He simply stood there, observing. His calm demeanor stood out in stark contrast to the other diplomats and dignitaries who were eager to make their mark. As the day progressed, Kaylara couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus wasn't like the others. He had an honesty about him that was rare in the galaxy. He didn't seem interested in using her for power, and he didn't seem afraid of her royal status. In fact, he seemed almost indifferent to it. For the first time in years, the princess felt an unfamiliar stirring, curiosity, mixed with something else, something she couldn't quite place. The evening came to a close, and the grand feast began. Kaylara had seen it all before: lavish tables, exotic foods, endless flattery. Yet, as she walked through the crowd, her thoughts drifted back to the human diplomat. She couldn't understand why he had affected her this way. The night was young, and the game of politics was just beginning. But one thing was certain: Princess Kaylara had never met anyone quite like Marcus Hale. The following day, the summit continued with discussions about the future of the Galactic Concord. Dignitaries from all corners of the galaxy gathered in the towering conference hall on Arthea, a neutral moon famous for its peaceful atmosphere. There was a sense of anticipation in the air. Diplomats from dozens of species came together, their bright uniforms and shining badges symbolizing the hope for a unified future. But Princess Kaylara wasn't paying much attention to the speeches or the debates. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the human lieutenant. She had seen him several times since their first brief exchange. He didn't act like the other diplomats. While they chattered and tried to win her favor with flattery, Marcus Hale stood apart, observing quietly. There was no boasting, no grand gestures, only the calm confidence of a man who didn't feel the need to prove himself. Most importantly, he didn't seem interested in impressing her. He wasn't trying to gain anything from their interaction. Kaylara couldn't understand it. Why did he seem so unaffected by her presence? Was it a lack of respect? Or perhaps it was something else entirely, a trait she found strangely refreshing in a galaxy filled with those who only saw her as a tool for political gain. As the debates carried on, Kaylara found herself watching him more than the proceedings. His sharp eyes and unruffled composure stood out in stark contrast to the restless and often boastful behavior of the other attendees. She couldn't help but be intrigued. Who was this human? It was during one of the quieter moments of the summit that their paths finally crossed. A group of diplomats had gathered near a side chamber to discuss a new alliance between several planets. The conversation was growing heated, with competing interests clashing over trade routes and resource control. Kaylara stood by, her mind wandering, when she noticed Marcus stepping forward, his calm expression never changing. "I think," he said in a steady voice, "we need to focus on something more important than resources. What good are alliances if they don't help those who need it most? We're discussing trade routes, but what about the millions of lives on planets where poverty and suffering are widespread? If we can't make a difference there, all of this is meaningless." The room went quiet. Every other diplomat had been so caught up in their own agendas that they hadn't even considered the question of fairness and equity. But Marcus's words struck a chord with Kaylara. It wasn't just his focus on justice. It was the way he spoke of it with genuine conviction, as though his words were not for show, but for the betterment of all. Kaylara moved closer, her curiosity getting the best of her. She had heard rumors about humans, how they were a young species in the grand scheme of things, how they had joined the Galactic Concord only recently. Yet there was something about Marcus that suggested more than the typical human bravado. There was a quiet strength to him. When the meeting broke up, Kaylara found herself walking toward him. Though she tried to keep her approach subtle, she had no intention of speaking with him right away. But she couldn't resist. She had to know more about this human who seemed to see the universe differently. As she neared him, Marcus noticed her, and for a moment, their eyes locked. For the first time, Kaylara wasn't sure what to say. Her usual sharpness, the ability to cut through conversations with ease, seemed to fade when faced with this unexpected connection. "I didn't expect to find you here, Princess," Marcus said with a small, respectful smile. "Seems like you've been avoiding the debates today." Kaylara tilted her head, unsure of how to respond. "I find them lacking in substance," she replied, her voice smooth but thoughtful. What you said earlier about the suffering of the people was rare. It's not often I hear someone speak about something beyond their own interests. Marcus chuckled softly. I suppose that's what happens when you spend most of your life around people who only care about what they can get from others. There was a brief silence before Kalara spoke again, her voice quieter. I don't know why, but I find your words different. Perhaps I was wrong to assume all humans are the same. Marcus shrugged. I'm just one person. We don't all fit in the same mold. Kalara studied him for a moment, her thoughts racing. There was something about him, something that intrigued her in a way she couldn't explain. She had seen countless suitors, each one vying for her attention with gifts or power. But Marcus, he was different. He wasn't trying to gain anything from her. He was simply speaking his mind, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Perhaps, Kalara said, her voice almost to herself, I've been wrong all along. Perhaps it's not about power or prestige. Maybe it's about something deeper. Marcus raised an eyebrow. His curiosity piqued. What do you mean? She hesitated for a moment before answering. Perhaps it's about finding someone who sees beyond titles and titles alone, who sees the person, not the crown. Marcus looked at her with a mixture of surprise and respect. For the first time, Kalara felt as if someone truly understood her. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another diplomat, and Kalara quickly excused herself. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She had spoken with many people over the years, but Marcus was the first one who had made her think in a way she never had before. She had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was certain. This human had captured her attention in a way no one else had. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The days passed, and the summit continued to unfold with discussions, debates, and proposals that stretched late into the nights. Princess Kalara found herself distracted more than she cared to admit. Each time she entered the Grand Hall, her eyes would instinctively search for Lieutenant Marcus Hale. It wasn't just his words from the other day that lingered in her mind. It was his presence, quiet, thoughtful, and unlike anything she had encountered in her life. Kalara was used to people wanting something from her, titles, power, or even a connection that could advance their status. But Marcus didn't seem to care about any of that. He was different. He spoke with honesty, without trying to impress, and Kalara had to admit that it fascinated her. The summit's most significant event was approaching. The Trials of Wisdom and Honor. These trials were legendary throughout the galaxy, designed to test the mental, physical, and moral strength of those who participated. Each year, they were held to allow leaders and diplomats to prove their worth beyond words. It was a test of not only intelligence but also character and compassion. Kalara had always participated in the trials before, always winning with ease. It was one of the few things she took pleasure in, as it showed that her intellect and resolve were unmatched. But this year, something felt different. She found herself thinking about the human diplomat more than she cared to admit. As the day of the trials approached, the tension in the air became thick with anticipation. The participants, leaders, diplomats, and other esteemed individuals from across the galaxy gathered in the central arena. Kalara stood in front of the great stone archway, her usual calm confidence radiating. She had never failed the trials before, and she had no intention of letting anything distract her. But as she looked across the arena, she spotted Marcus standing among the crowd of spectators. His calm, focused expression caught her eye once again. For the first time, she felt a strange flutter in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite place. It was as if he was watching her, waiting to see if she could truly live up to the reputation that she had built for herself. The trials began with a series of intellectual challenges, riddles, puzzles, and questions that tested the participants' problem-solving abilities. Kalara excelled, as she always did. Her sharp mind navigated the obstacles with ease, and she quickly moved from one challenge to the next, her confidence growing with each step. But then came the final challenge, one that tested more than just intellect. The participants were led into a simulated environment, a digital landscape that mimicked a real-world scenario. They were tasked with making difficult decisions, decisions that could affect entire civilizations. The choices were never easy. It was a moral test. Would the participants prioritize the needs of the many over the few? Would they make sacrifices, or would they choose the path that was safest for them personally? Kalara stood in front of the final challenge, a difficult choice before her. The simulated world around her was realistic, and the consequences of her decisions were immediate. The lives of entire populations depended on her actions. The simulation's timer began to count down, and the pressure mounted. For the first time in her life, Kalara hesitated. She had never been forced to make a decision like this before. As a ruler, she had always relied on logic and strategy. But this was different. This test required empathy, understanding, and compassion. She had never thought about the needs of others the way she was forced to think now. The lives of millions were in her hands. The lives of innocents. She knew she could take the easy route, solve the problem with logic and precision, like she always had. But something told her that wasn't the right choice this time. In that moment, she remembered Marcus's words, his talk of fairness, of helping those who were suffering. The simple, honest way he viewed the galaxy and its problems. For the first time, she considered something more than just strategy. She thought about people, about the beings who were affected by every decision made by those in power. Kalara took a deep breath and made her choice. She sacrificed the resources she could have used for her own people and directed them toward the suffering colonies on the fringe of the empire. It wasn't the easy decision, but it was the right one. She watched as the simulation changed before her eyes, the balance tipping in favor of those who needed help the most. The pressure that had weighed on her shoulders seemed to lift, and for the first time, Kalara felt a sense of peace. The timer ran out, and the digital world faded into nothingness. Kalara stood silently for a moment, her mind still reeling from the weight of the decision she had made. The other participants were still finishing their trials, but Kalara knew something had shifted in her. She had passed the test, not just of intellect, but of heart. As she walked off the stage, she noticed Marcus standing at the edge of the arena. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, she felt exposed. But then he gave her a small, approving smile. There was no applause, no grand celebration. But there was something in his gaze that told her he understood. Kalara felt a strange warmth in her chest. She had passed the trials, but more than that, she had discovered something new about herself. And maybe, just maybe, it was thanks to the human who had made her think differently about the world. As the day drew to a close, Kalara found herself looking forward to the next step in this strange journey. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Marcus had become more than just a diplomat to her. He had become a challenge, a mystery that she wanted to solve. The trials of wisdom and honor had been a defining moment for Princess Kalara, but they were far from over. The first set of tests had challenged her intellect and moral compass, but now the real trials were about to begin. As the sun rose over Arthea, the participants gathered at the grand arena once again. This time, the trials would test their physical endurance and strategic thinking. The first challenge was a demanding obstacle course designed to push the limits of even the most trained warriors. Yet, Kalara didn't seem worried. She had been trained from a young age to excel in every arena, mental, physical, and diplomatic. The years of preparation had made her strong, disciplined, and unshakable. She stood tall at the starting line, her expression calm and focused. Around her, other participants prepared themselves, adjusting their armor and stretching their muscles. But Kalara's attention was elsewhere. Her thoughts drifted back to Marcus. After the trials of wisdom the previous day, they had shared a brief conversation. He had commented on her decision during the final test, telling her it was a choice that showed her strength, not just as a ruler but as a person. She hadn't known how to respond, but deep down, She felt something stir in her chest. It wasn't admiration. It was something more. It was strange. No one had ever made her feel this way. As the starting signal echoed through the arena, Kalara snapped back to the present. The obstacle course began, and she was soon racing across the ground, her mind sharp, her body moving with fluid precision. She leaped over barriers, crawled through mud pits, and scaled towering walls, all with ease. It was second nature to her, a test of her physical prowess that she could navigate without breaking a sweat. However, it wasn't the physical challenge that caught her attention. As she neared the final stage of the obstacle course, something unexpected happened. She glanced up and noticed Marcus standing at the edge of the arena, watching her with that same thoughtful expression. For the first time, Kalara felt a flutter of nerves. His gaze was unwavering, and there was a quiet intensity to it that made her wonder what he was thinking. She had been so focused on proving herself to others, but now his presence made her question why she was pushing herself so hard. Was she truly doing this for her people, for the Empire, or was it simply for the sake of proving herself, even to those who barely knew her? She quickly pushed the thought aside and finished the final stretch of the course, crossing the finish line just moments ahead of the others. She had won, as expected. Her body was slightly sore, but it was nothing compared to the satisfaction of victory. The crowd erupted in applause, and Kalara stood tall, taking in the recognition. Yet something about the victory felt hollow. She wasn't sure what had changed. The next challenge was one that would test the participants' leadership abilities. It was a simulated crisis, one that required them to make difficult decisions under extreme pressure. A digital city was under attack by an enemy force, and it was up to the participants to guide their virtual people to safety. Each leader had a different approach. Some focused on military defense, others on evacuations, and some on negotiations. Kalara's decision was swift. She called for a full evacuation of the city, instructing her virtual people to retreat to safety while she mobilized her forces for a counteroffensive. She had studied the strategies of great military leaders and understood the importance of both defense and offense. Her plan was clear and decisive. But as the simulation played out, something unexpected happened. As Kalara observed her strategy unfold, she found herself questioning the cost of victory. She had saved the city, but at what cost? Many lives had been lost in the process. It was the hard truth of leadership, that every decision carried a price. She had made the right choice for the greater good, but the weight of that decision felt heavier than it ever had before. Once again, her mind drifted to Marcus. He had said something during their brief conversation that she couldn't forget. It's not always about winning, Kalara. It's about understanding the people you're fighting for. As the simulation ended, Kalara stood there for a long moment, contemplating the outcome. The audience cheered, but it didn't feel like a victory. Her strategy had worked, but it didn't satisfy her the way it once had. She had been so focused on proving her ability to lead that she had overlooked the human side of leadership, the empathy that came with caring for those she commanded. The next trial was one that Kalara dreaded. It wasn't physical or intellectual. It was a test of trust. The participants were paired up and asked to navigate a maze blindfolded, relying solely on their partner to guide them. Kalara had never been one to trust easily. She had learned early in life that reliance on others often led to disappointment. Yet, as she prepared to face this challenge, she realized that there was someone she could trust. Someone who had shown her that trust wasn't a weakness. She turned to find Marcus standing near the starting line, waiting for her. The crowd around them had begun to whisper, and for the first time, Kalara felt her heart race in a way she hadn't expected. Without a word, they donned their blindfolds and entered the maze together. Marcus took the lead, guiding her through the twists and turns with careful steps. She followed his directions, her heart beating a little faster with every step they took. There was something about his presence that made her feel safe, as if she could trust him completely. They reached the end of the maze faster than anyone had expected, and when the blindfolds were removed, Kalara found herself standing in front of Marcus, looking into his eyes. It wasn't the physical victory that mattered. It was the trust they had built in such a short time. And in that moment, Kalara realized something that surprised her. She wasn't just drawn to Marcus because of his intelligence or his ability to lead. She was drawn to him because he had shown her what it meant to trust, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she could let her guard down. As the days of the summit stretched on, the trials continued, each one more intense than the last. Princess Kalara, despite her confidence and skill, began to feel the weight of the competition pressing down on her. She had never questioned her abilities before, but something had shifted. The presence of Marcus Hale lingered in her thoughts, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to leadership than strategy, power, and intellect. The maze challenge had been a turning point for her. The trust she had placed in Marcus, a trust she hadn't extended to anyone else in years, had opened something inside her. It wasn't just the physical or mental challenges that tested her. It was her heart, her ability to connect with others in a way that didn't rely solely on her title or status. As Kalara walked through the corridors of the summit, her mind was racing. The grand hall was bustling with activity. Diplomats from every corner of the galaxy engaged in heated discussions, the air thick with debates and negotiations. She could feel the tension in the atmosphere, the constant push and pull for power and influence. But as she walked through the crowd, she didn't feel the same excitement she had once felt about these high-stakes games of politics. She thought of Marcus again. The way he had spoken so frankly to her, his honest and direct approach, had left a lasting impression. He was different from the others, not concerned with titles or gaining favor, but focused on what really mattered, making a difference in the lives of those who were suffering. Kalara paused in front of a large window that overlooked the tranquil landscape of Arthea. The view was breathtaking. A sea of rolling hills and distant mountains, bathed in the soft light of the twin suns. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the beauty of the world outside calm her racing thoughts. It was in these quiet moments of solitude that she often found clarity. But today, something felt different. A new realization was beginning to take root within her. She had spent so much of her life focused on proving herself, on showing that she was more than just a princess, that she was capable of leading an empire. But Marcus's words, his actions, had made her wonder if there was more to leadership than simply being the strongest or the smartest. Perhaps it was time to lead not just with her mind, but with her heart. Kalara's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to find Marcus walking toward her, his calm presence cutting through the crowd. There was no fanfare, no grand gestures. He simply walked toward her as though they were the only two people in the room. "Princess Kalara," he greeted her, his voice steady and warm. Kalara felt a flutter in her chest at the sound of his voice, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. "Lieutenant Hale," she replied, her tone more composed than she felt. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." Marcus gave a small smile, his eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. "I've been keeping an eye on you," he said. "I think you're beginning to understand something important." Kalara raised an eyebrow, curious. "And what would that be?" "That leadership is not just about what you can do, but about who you choose to be," Marcus said, his gaze unwavering. "It's about knowing when to trust, when to lead, and when to follow. It's about putting others first, even when it's difficult." His words struck deep within her, resonating with something she had only recently started to understand. She had always thought of leadership as a solitary role, one where she had to carry the burden alone. But Marcus was right. True leadership was about connection, about building trust and understanding with others. "You've been right all along," Kalara said quietly, more to herself than to Marcus. "It's about something more than just being strong. It's about doing what's best for everyone, even when it's not easy." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Exactly. And that's why you're different from the others here. You're not just a ruler. You're someone who genuinely cares. And that's what makes you strong." Kalara felt her heart swell at his words. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had ever seen her for more than her title, but Marcus did. He saw her as a person, not just as a princess. "I've spent so much of my life trying to prove I'm more than just a crown," she confessed, her voice softer now. "I've worked so hard to show that I'm capable of leading, but I've forgotten that true leadership comes from understanding others, not just commanding them." Marcus stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's never too late to start," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "You have the power to change things, Kelara. You don't have to do it alone. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real." Kelara looked at him for a long moment, taking in his words. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. She didn't have to be everything to everyone. She didn't have to carry the weight of the universe on her shoulders. She just needed to lead with her heart, with empathy, and with the belief that she could make a real difference. "I think I'm beginning to understand," Kelara said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. Marcus smiled, a look of approval in his eyes. "I knew you would." As Kelara stood there, looking out at the peaceful landscape of Arthea, she felt a quiet sense of clarity wash over her. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. She was ready to face it, not as a ruler who had to prove herself, but as a leader who cared. And with that understanding, she knew she was finally on the right path. The days seemed to stretch on as the summit neared its end. Princess Kelara felt a shift in herself, one that was hard to explain but impossible to ignore. The clarity she had gained in recent days was transforming her perspective on leadership and her role in the galaxy, and as much as she tried to focus on the tasks ahead, her mind kept drifting back to Marcus Hale. Their conversations had become more frequent, but they were always brief, as if there was an unspoken understanding between them that neither needed to vocalize. Marcus, with his calm demeanor and straightforward approach, had a way of making her feel at ease, even amidst the chaos of the summit. She had never felt so seen, so understood by anyone, especially not by someone who wasn't part of her royal court or political circle. Each time they spoke, she found herself learning something new. He didn't view leadership through the same lens of power and prestige that she was used to. He saw it as a responsibility, one that required honesty, empathy, and the willingness to make tough choices. His perspective was refreshing, and for the first time, Kelara felt as if she were learning more about herself than she had in years of ruling. The summit was now drawing to a close. The final challenge had been announced, a grand debate in which all the leaders would discuss the future of the galaxy. It would test their ability to negotiate, persuade, and present their visions for the future. Kelara had always been confident in her ability to handle debates, but this time, it felt different. She wasn't just fighting for her empire's interests anymore. She was fighting for something greater, the chance to shape a future that considered the well-being of all, not just the powerful. As the day of the debate approached, Kelara found herself walking through the gardens of the summit complex, lost in thought. The quiet surroundings helped calm her nerves, and she was grateful for the peace. She had spent so many years surrounded by noise, by the pressure of politics and the demands of leadership, that moments like these were rare and precious. Kelara paused in front of a fountain, the sound of the flowing water providing a soothing background to her thoughts. It was then that she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. There was a familiarity to the sound, a steady rhythm that made her heart skip a beat. "Princess," Marcus's voice greeted her softly. She turned to face him, offering a small smile. "Marcus." He stood a few feet away, his expression thoughtful. "You've been quiet lately. I can tell something's on your mind." Kelara sighed and leaned against the stone railing of the fountain. "It's the debate," she admitted. "I'm preparing for it, but it feels different this time. I've spent so much of my life fighting for my people, for my empire, but now I wonder if it's enough. What if my vision for the future isn't what's best for everyone?" Marcus approached her, his eyes soft with understanding. "That's the mark of a true leader," he said. "The willingness to question, to consider other perspectives. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being open to change, to growth. And that's something I see in you, Kalara. Kalara felt her chest tighten at his words. There was something in his gaze that made her feel exposed, vulnerable in a way she wasn't used to. She had always kept her emotions guarded, but with Marcus, she felt as though he could see right through her walls. "I'm not sure I'm ready," she confessed, her voice quieter than she intended. "I've led with strength, with strategy. But now, I want to lead with compassion. I want to create a future where everyone has a chance, where no one is left behind. But I don't know if I can do it." Marcus smiled gently, stepping closer. "You're already doing it, Kalara. Every decision you've made, every action you've taken, has been a step toward that future. The fact that you care so deeply, that you're questioning what's best for everyone, shows the kind of leader you are." For a moment, Kalara stood there, looking into his eyes. There was a sincerity in his words, a conviction that made her believe in herself in a way she hadn't before. She had always been afraid of her own vulnerability, of showing that she didn't have all the answers. But with Marcus, she felt safe. He didn't expect perfection. He didn't expect her to have all the answers. He simply wanted her to be herself, and that more than anything made her feel strong. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what I'd do without your support." "You don't have to do anything alone, Kalara," Marcus said, his tone warm and reassuring. "We're all in this together." For the first time in a long while, Kalara felt a sense of peace. The weight of her responsibilities had not disappeared, but it no longer felt as heavy. With Marcus by her side, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead, not just as a ruler, but as a person who was learning, growing, and willing to make the world a better place. The sound of footsteps behind them interrupted the moment, signaling the arrival of other summit leaders. The debate was about to begin, and it was time to return to the Grand Hall. But Kalara didn't feel nervous anymore. She felt ready. As they walked toward the hall, side by side, Kalara realized that the journey ahead was no longer just about winning or losing. It was about creating a future where compassion, empathy, and trust could shape the galaxy into something better. And for the first time, she was no longer afraid to lead with her heart. The Grand Hall was buzzing with anticipation. Leaders from every corner of the galaxy had gathered, eager to hear the final debate on the future of the galaxy. Princess Kalara stood near the entrance, taking a deep breath as she surveyed the room. The walls were lined with delegates, their faces serious and focused. It was a high-stakes moment, one that could shape the fate of entire worlds. Kalara had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but now that it had arrived, she felt a mixture of emotions. The weight of her role, of her title, had never been so heavy. But this time, she wasn't just fighting for her empire or her people. She was fighting for something greater, a vision of the future where compassion, unity, and understanding could replace the endless cycle of war and power struggles that had defined the galaxy for so long. Marcus stood beside her, his calm presence grounding her. They had spent hours discussing strategies, weighing the pros and cons of every potential outcome. His insights had been invaluable, and in those moments, Kalara had realized something important. She didn't need to face this alone. With Marcus at her side, she felt a strength she hadn't known before. It wasn't just his wisdom. It was his unwavering belief in her, in the choices she was making. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked softly, his voice a reassuring anchor in the sea of noise around them. Kalara glanced at him, meeting his steady gaze. "I think I am," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "For the first time, I feel like I know what I want. And it's not just about winning this debate. It's about creating a future that's worth fighting for." Marcus smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "You've got this. Just speak from the heart." The doors to the hall opened, and Kalara stepped into the center, the lights from the grand chandeliers casting a soft glow on her as she walked toward the podium. The room fell silent, and all eyes were on her. The other leaders, diplomats, and representatives from across the galaxy watched intently, waiting to hear her vision. She took a moment, allowing herself to absorb the stillness before speaking. Honored delegates, esteemed leaders, and citizens of the galaxy, she began, her voice steady and clear. We stand at a crossroads. The decisions we make today will shape the future for generations to come. Kalara paused, feeling the weight of her words settle in the air. She glanced briefly at Marcus, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. It was a simple gesture, but it made all the difference. She felt grounded, confident, as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for her to speak. For too long, we have lived in a cycle of power struggles, of wars fought over resources, territory, and influence. She continued, her voice growing stronger. We have allowed ourselves to be divided by borders, by our differences, by the belief that the strong must dominate the weak. But I stand before you today to tell you that this way is not the future we deserve. There was a murmur of interest from the crowd, and Kalara took a deep breath before going on. We have the power to create something better. We can build a galaxy where compassion and understanding are the foundation of our relations. A galaxy where no one is left behind, where every voice is heard, and where our strength comes from our unity, not our division. Her words hung in the air, and Kalara felt a stirring within her, a belief in her vision that had grown stronger with each passing day. This wasn't just about her. This was about every person, every planet, every species that had been silenced for far too long. I know that change is difficult. I know that it requires sacrifice, understanding, and the willingness to do what is right, not just what is easy, she said, her eyes sweeping across the room. But I believe we can do this. We can create a future where the galaxy is united, where peace is not just a dream but a reality. She glanced down at her hands, resting on the podium, and felt a quiet confidence settle within her. She had spent so many years trying to be perfect, trying to live up to the expectations of her title. But now, for the first time, she wasn't trying to be perfect. She was just being herself, speaking from her heart, trusting in the future she was trying to build. Today, I ask for your trust, Kalara said, her voice unwavering. I ask for your commitment to a future where we work together, not against each other. A future where the well-being of every citizen, every planet, is the measure of our success. The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of her words settling over them. Then, slowly, one by one, the leaders began to clap. The sound grew louder, building into a steady applause. Kalara stood tall, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and hope. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Marcus's quiet words from earlier echoed in her mind. Just speak from the heart. And she had. And it had worked. As the applause continued, Kalara felt a surge of emotion. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a leader who had chosen a different path, a path where empathy and compassion were the guiding forces, not just strategy and power. And as the applause subsided, Kalara glanced toward Marcus. Their eyes met, and in that shared glance, Kalara knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't feel so frightening. With Marcus by her side, Kalara knew that she wasn't just leading the galaxy. She was shaping it into something better.